Welcome to Play the Man Podcast, a podcast seeking to build sturdy men in a wobbly world.
Welcome back to the Play the Man Podcast. We're together with Shane and Pastor Pete together today. What we're talking about is news consumption, how to stay informed in the news, how to choose the best news service you possibly can. So yeah, guys, it's a good question. Let's start with, how do you guys stay informed with the news?
I think, to me, a news source is like a good friend. And what you're looking for is consistent behavior over time. You know, can I trust this guy? Is what he tells me true? You look at news sources that maybe put something out and everyone's laughing at them. And then 6 months later, everything they said was proved true.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, not only did they put out true information, you know, as best as we can determine in these days what's objectively true, but they were unafraid to put it out. And I'm like, okay, you're building my trust.
Yeah. So, okay. So you have to predict well.
You have to test.
Yeah.
You have to listen, you have to test, and then once they've earned your trust, then proceed incrementally.
So who's your trusted news source?
I'm a big fan of the Gateway Pundit.
Nice. Okay. What is that for our folks that don't know?
The Gateway Pundit, what I like about it is they put out information very quickly. They'll put out quick information, you know, a headline, i.e. this assassination attempt at Trump, right? So they're not going to put something out. They're not quick to go to facts, but they're quick to put out information. And it's usually a short article that you can read quickly, but then over time they gather more information on that and flesh it out.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, I think of the old days. My parents would, like, was it NBC, CBS, or ABC, the 11 o'clock news?
Right.
You got the summation of what happened that day.
Yeah.
Now online, it's minute by minute, you know, and a new article can come out within 5 minutes of reading one, and you've kind of, you build on that knowledge.
Yeah, in that regard, Twitter's the news feed, yeah?
It is.
It is for me, very much so. And I think that's what's crazy, is it's ever changing. Like, what are the trusted news sources? Who's becoming irrelevant? Who's crossing that line into fake news? I feel like it's changing like every year, you know. And so I can. It just seems like yesterday when I thought BBC was pretty good, you know. And I still think BBC is pretty good if they're reporting in Africa or Asia, sure, or somewhere else outside of Europe or the United States. They have a few hobby horse issues that they get caught up on, and they're terrible on those issues, and you're never going to get the truth. And there's others that they're really good at, and I feel like a lot of news is like that, you know. I can remember when Vice News first came out, and I appreciated a lot of what they were doing, and then they still have some good pieces, you know. If you're looking at Russian pilots who fly cargo planes in the DRC or something like that, just to have like a really good report on something like that, and then just have a terrible report on something on the home front. And so I have found myself actually Twitter going more and more to that. But I feel like you kind of have your trusted sources, and you stick with those until they lie to you, and then they start falling out of favor. But I feel like some people are more inclined to push a narrative in one area or lie in one area, if you just want to say it straight, and then in other areas are still willing to be somewhat fair and objective. Yeah. You know, and so and I like to at least read the headlines on CNN, I read the headlines on Fox. I rarely go to either one of those for in-depth, but just to see kind of what the spectrum is. Yeah. And then I have, you know, my favorite on geopolitics. I like BBC on some things. I started using Straight Arrow News. Have you guys heard of that? No. Which is it's interesting in the sense that it's not where I necessarily go for my news, but it'll show what stories are being overreported by the left, and underreported by the right, and vice versa. So you can see every major news carrier is covering this story for leftist, media outlets, and every right wing outlets covering this story, and here's the ones who they're both covering, and it's really interesting to see how few stories both of them are covering in the same way, or even covering.
Interesting.
And so that's just been kind of fun to keep up with what's going on. But I feel like if you really want to know from like a populist standpoint or on the ground what's going on, I mean, Twitter is so hard to beat.
Yeah. Because it's a live feed of people crowdsourcing.
Yeah, it's a crowdsource. And because of that, you're going to get some misinformation early.
Yeah.
But a great example is, we're recording this the week after the assassination of Trump.
Assassination attempt on Trump.
Yeah, sorry, attempt.
We don't know.
I'm sorry.
We don't know the future. Shane, we don't know when we're publishing this.
You want to be careful with this disinformation.
A week after
did that happen?
After Trump fell down and there were some loud noises.
Yeah.
As we talk about
Right.
the way the news gets reported. But it was interesting, like on Twitter, to see how quickly we knew things and how long it took mainstream media to know things that were already
So
like
Twitter's
old
kind of
information.
like the assassination attempt with all the peoples with cell phones. So you're just getting all this like...
So I went to The Drudge, and The
Right,
Drudge is just an aggregator, and the top headline was about this thing, and I clicked on it, and it was a Twitter video from a person in the audience.
Right.
Headline on Drudge. They get 1 billion hits a day or whatever.
Right.
That was their number one link to a Twitter video.
Yeah.
That showed it within minutes, and it was exactly what happened, right? It was like they're like 10 feet away.
Yeah.
You can't even plan for that, right? You can't
Right.
capture that in a planned way, even.
Right.
And of the way people leak things too, right? So it's like there was a mainstream media. We don't even know if it was a shooter. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or if it was firecrackers.
There's pictures of like
Twitter-
a shooter on a
Twitter, a picture of the guy
With the
dead
With the
on
gun.
the roof,
Yeah,
like
on tripod.
up close, and it's like, no, there was a shooter, and he's already dead,
Yeah.
and they already knew his name on
Yeah.
Twitter, and that's the crazy thing about how fast information travels there. And you realize, like, if you're going to be a reputable news source, you have to slow down and you have to verify. Where Twitter doesn't have to slow down or verify, and they got a lot of things wrong, but it is interesting that you can at least trust your eyes, and I think there were some of those things going on in 2020 as well, where they either weren't being reported or misreported, and you could go on Twitter and actually get a pretty good idea of what was going on in Canada and what was going on in Italy and what was going on around the world, because it was crowdsourced.
Yeah.
So
You said a phrase there. You said reputable news source. If you want to be a reputable news source, what would that look like today? I mean, that's a definitional question. It seems easy, right? But then it's not easy if you say, like, just what you just said, which was like, I go to these two groups, they're CNN and Fox or whatever, and they're polarizing, they're saying the same thing totally differently. Like, they're looking at the same facts differently.
Right.
And do you simply choose by how you would have viewed those facts? Or are you looking for a different form of objectivity, right? It's like, what are they...
I think what's different today, even though, is like, I think there was maybe a time where people had certain biases, and we all know that. Like, and we admit, like, even as pastors, we have certain biases when we go to the text. We're trying to lay aside those as best we can and interpret the text as it was meant to be read. But you're having to do that with your own biases. Anyways, but I think there was a sense in which people used to come to the news that way.
Yeah.
I maybe sort of have a left bias, and I'm trying not to let it affect it, but of course it is to some degree, and I have a right, and I'm trying not to let it affect it. I don't think that's what happens anymore.
No.
I think there's a narrative, and that's pushed from an editor and everybody along the line who's a journalist. It's get on board. This is the official narrative.
Yeah.
You get on board, and no one's allowed to actually look at the evidence and form an unbiased opinion or an opinion at all, and so
I agree, and I actually have a specific example, and I'm not bringing it up to like a fight about it specifically, but like I think it's one of the greatest conspiracies in modern day media, which is keeping the January 6th headline as a headline for up to 3 years after that event. Mm-hmm. The news cycle changes typically within like 48 hours.
Right.
They were barely covering the attempted assassination on Trump for longer than 48 hours. They, as in more of the liberal media.
Right.
But this Jan 6 thing, I'm not saying it wasn't serious. We could talk about that later, but like 3 years in the news cycle for that thing, that was a core. There's no way because the public interest waned days after it happened.
Well,
but
you
they
can also
forced
see the
public interest to
collage
buy.
they do, right? Where they do like, sort of the Brady Bunch TV. There's all these little separate screens on the TV of all the different news anchors.
Yeah.
I mean, from a whole gamut. There's probably 15 to 20 news anchors on the TV at once.
Yeah.
They do the little square things, right? And they have them talking at the same time with the exact same verbiage.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Right.
The headlines are treated identically.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, that's coordinated.
Coordinated.
Yeah, all the way down to your local news,
Right.
where it's just someone in Podunk, Indiana, or whatever, and they're saying the exact same phrases that somebody in
Trump falls after hearing popping noises, and everyone's saying that. I'm just making this up, but that's that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting now is, with this assassination attempt, talking about news sources and kind of what's going on, is there's some people talking about this bias, right? So people that are always going to hate Trump for whatever reason, is this whole assassination attempt was something he orchestrated and masterminded.
Right.
That is, a 5.56 bullet, millimeters from your brain. Hey, Frank, I'm going to stand here. When I turn my head, you do your best
When
shot.
I sneeze, that's the signal. Don't blow my head off.
And so people are interviewing these people, but what's happening is people that have a bias way to the left are saying, oh no, that's impossible, right?
Yeah.
So now you've got the left divided on what's a reputable news source and what isn't. So some are saying it's only reputable if you say this specific event was orchestrated.
Yeah.
And then others that are, we would maybe assume equally biased to the left to say, Bill Maher, for instance, the classic liberal.
Yeah.
Not the progressive, has been kind of back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes you say, hey, man, I think I could enjoy a beer with Bill Maher.
Yeah.
At least we can dialogue about this.
Oh, yeah.
But, what is reputable for Bill Maher? Is it always something on the left? Or are we putting analysis? Are we using, our just good reasoning with the information we're getting?
Yeah.
We got to process it. We got to think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? Is that people aren't doing that, and I think, I don't know the statistics on it, but how many actual news companies are there out there? I mean, there's only a handful that own everything, right? And so it's just that's why there's those talking heads that all sound alike or repeat the exact same phrases, and so you really can have someone at the top that says, "No, this is the story," and then everybody runs with it, and I think that's where we're at today, right? Is how do you trust anything in a world where you've been lied to and it's hard to trust anything? So
I even struggle with the idea of objectivity in news. We're not designed to be necessarily objective people.
Right.
We're not built that way.
Right.
God made us to be subjective based on experience and all these other things. And I actually think it'd be healthy for everyone to be like, we expect them to be subjective. They're not going for objective, but make the subjectivity, whether you describe the blood as bright red or dark red, and don't make it so different as this guy did get shot or didn't get shot.
Right, yeah.
And that seems like too much of a difference of a swing.
Yeah.
But it's even a bit more intriguing than that, I think. It's so the first awakening I had of this was reporters and reporting was 2003 deployment, that initial invasion into Iraq. So we then had embedded reporters. With me in our unit was an embedded reporter from LA Times. I got to know him really well. And then there was another guy from England that was with the, not BBC, but Associated Press. So two Associated Press reporter, LA Times reporter, right? So this guy grew up in Southern California with me, got to talking to him. We hit two major missions, and they were reporting on that. And we could see the headline, what they were reporting. And I went toe-to-toe with both reporters. And I said, that isn't accurate. Like, you can't write that. That's not what happened. I mean, I know it's not what happened because I was there.
Yeah.
And he looked at me, he says, Pete, you don't understand. You don't understand what pressure I'm under from my editor.
You see, what we want to say is that the American soldiers really don't want to be a part of this, and they're all disillusioned, or whatever, and I got to stay with that narrative. And I said, but you know that isn't true. And another one was this operation when we got into Baghdad, and I'm like, it was just, it was so off the mark. It was unbelievable. And that Associated Press reporter absolutely apologized to me. When we redeployed, he came to one of our military ceremonies. He says, I'm sorry, Pete, but I was under a lot of pressure from my editor. And then I realized these aren't just objective censors out there reporting what's happening, which is, I think, what the people want. Like all of us that are talking about consuming news, we don't want an orchestrated narrative. We want to know what happened.
Well, they're telling us they're going to do it that way.
Right.
Right? They're like, well, we're going to go report on what's going on.
Right.
We're like, oh, okay. Well, what else are we supposed to do with that? Not trust them out of the gate? I mean, that's not cool either. But yeah, to your point, it's about reps. That's a really good story. I assumed that happened, but because everyone picks on things like Vietnam, right? But like, it's got to be common all the time, especially with foreign engagement.
Why it was so impactful for me is I didn't just read about this from someone I trusted. I actually experienced it. Like, I was in these operations. And when I confronted them, they didn't deny what I was saying. Their excuse was, you don't understand, I'm under a lot of pressure from my editor.
Yeah, but they just wrote the history on it, and that's the kind of thing that people source for history books. Eventually, is eyewitness reports, but also journalists. Right? I mean, it's how you build your books later after the fact. All right, well, that was depressing. So what's the idea, though, around looking for logic in your reports, right? So I think part of what you said, and I very much agree, is in any of these things, when we're consuming, especially when we're consuming, you have to be diligent about what you consume and how often and what it does to you, but that you're also being rigorous about how you take that in, whatever it is, right? And in this case, it's opinion, mostly, or somebody trying to keep you informed on something going on in your country. Because most of what we're talking about is macro view stuff, right? Not local. It's national level stuff. So what are some good ways in your mind do you kind of say, hey, this is, I mean, like, in my head, it's like, well, you just said this and you said this and I saw the same thing and I don't know. I don't think that lines up with what I saw. Or logical fallacies in the article, or just a going in position that's just not going to let them report in a certain way. I mean, what are you looking for when you're trying to say, okay, I need to be discerning. I'm going to read this whole thing though, because it sounds interesting. What are you doing in your head?
I'm doing things like this, and this is just kind of an anecdotal collage type thing, but when you look at what's going on with, like, let's say the topic happens to be the woke world, right? And there's a guy like Jordan Peterson, and I didn't even know who this guy was. But the moment I say, this guy was holding a line that got him fired from his job, and everything about that line that he was holding was not helping him in any way. It was only hurting him. Yet he held that line. And so the first thing I think, what's he saying? And because now he's got now he's piqued my interest, right? Because he's virtually losing almost everything. He's not gaining from this. He's only losing. Yet he's holding that line. And then I want to say, he's putting more information out. What else is he saying? One, this seems to be a guy that had the courage to hold an ethical position for the sake of that position, for the sake of truth.
Yeah, I think it's a good one.
I think one of the things I look for is, one, expertise. Like, I don't really go to, I mean, so
that's why you land on Twitter.
Well, that's what's great about Twitter is you can pick who you follow on Twitter, and the people who actually know what they're talking about, and you can sift that out from all the people who are just eyewitness accounts.
Or it might be someone in an event that's there and recording it, and it's like the expertise is they're 10 feet away.
Video camera.
Exactly. But I think. I mean, it is funny that just because somebody, I mean, you have to realize, news at some level is entertainment, and so to just turn on the nightly news or whatever is it's a business. It's there to make money. It's there to entertain. And so So trying to find, I think, news sources too, where you have expertise, where it's not just somebody who's reading a teleprompter, and then and someone who maybe doesn't have, they're not being steered. They're not being fed the narrative. They don't work for major news corporation X or whatever, and so those are the ones where I've found are the most helpful. And so like, for instance, on geopolitics, I don't agree with everything that he would say about things in the U.S., but generally on geopolitics, like Peter Zion, I really appreciate. Yeah. But he makes these little 10-15 minute YouTube videos, and he can say whatever he wants.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? He's like, he's talking about what he wants when he wants. Nobody's steering him.
Yeah, he's smart too.
And he's smart, and that's what I'm saying. He's got expertise, and he's not beholden to anybody. He's not steered. Right. And so even when I disagree with him, I think it's you're disagreeing with somebody who that disagreement is because of how you see the world. It's not because somebody fed him a narrative that he has to keep or he's going to lose his job. It's not the guy who says, yeah, but Shane, I would really love to tell you the truth, but I can't because I got to feed my kids. Right. He's not under that. So.
And for that same reason, that's why another guy I really like, wait for it, Tucker Carlson Network. Why? Because what does he say? I'm not beholden to anyone.
Yeah.
Now, he's not an expert. I mean, his expertise is journalism, right? Yeah. So, but also, I mean, here's another factor that I look for, right? And it's you've got to weigh it carefully. But I have seen, and how much of this is true, I'm not sure, but intuitively, I think I've seen in Tucker Carlson a viewpoint that is based on a growing Christian faith. I think when he's seen, he jokes about, I was raised up in an Episcopal church. I know that was not really a church. He kind of jokes about it in that way, but he's saying, look, I'm really taking my faith more seriously.
Yeah.
So from a biblical worldview perspective is something I would also look at. But I just like the fact that doesn't mean he's right on everything, but to know that he's not beholden to a narrative that he must keep to. It's his own narrative. He takes his own risks. I'm more apt to listen to someone like that than the mainstream media.
Yeah, and I think that's why like the rise of podcasts has kind of become a thing.
Right.
Is you can just trust some of the entertainment, trust that the news they're going to give you is going to be from their perspective, and that's it. Right? Yeah. Not a lot more to it. Right. I agree with what you guys are saying, and one of the other things I think is helpful. I read an article a couple weeks ago about a study that Google did on internet browsing and reading habits, blog reading habits on different generations, and specifically this was for Gen Z. I don't know much about that generation except what they found was they had a null report on their consumption because they click headlines and they generally, by far and large, do not read the article at all. They scroll to the bottom to look on opinion for comments on the article. And then they get off the page. So they're like, well, we're analyzing the right data set, basically. And so they're doing the test again. But that freaked me out, that piece of information, because I was like, oh. And so what I find in talking about news is I think sometimes talking about the details helps. I think as a society and as a people, we don't really want to get into hard conversations.
Right.
Like, you don't want to know that a friend of yours was like, upset or not upset about the attempted assassination of Trump. Like maybe not. Maybe they should be upset and they're not, right? Or whatever it is. You do kind of have to ask about details or get into details, I think, sometimes because they matter in a news update. And that narrative might be completely printed, but you still have to wrestle down the details with other people if you're going to share that experience. Because that's what news is supposed to be.
I don't want truth and facts. I just want like awesome sound bites.
It's true, but like if we're gonna have a shared experience, we have to someday line up on a detail.
That's right.
So I think sometimes when people bring up articles, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, and add something pithy to it. That's what I do. But it's better to probably just like, what did you think about the thing? I mean, the thing I want to talk about with this attempted assassination is the Secret Service. It's like the number one thing in my head is like the most elite group on the planet. What did I just witness with that, right? What did everyone witness? But that's a detail to then get into, and then to build, I think, connection and bridges over the news.
Right.
Because that's what we're not doing. We're getting polarized about the topics before we even talk about it.
That's right.
So anyways, for the record, I get my news from my wife. She listens to the Daily Wire, so she's a big Ben Shapiro fan. I call it the soothing sounds of Ben Shapiro. And what I love about them is that they're very forward about their lack of objectivity in certain areas. And so sometimes when I think about trusting news sources, I think about like, well, would a news source invite George Gilder, or would a news source invite another economist, a Thomas Sowell, to come in and have a real conversation, not to fight with, but to learn from? Like, that means I can line up with their form of thinking. It means I can probably suss through the logic of their news. But it almost has to be a little bit principle aligned if it's going to be productive for me. Otherwise, I'm just rejecting everything out of the gate, and then down through all the details, and I just have to keep fighting everything. When I want news, I want to be informed. I don't want to have to battle everything I'm reading.
Right.
So you kind of have to have a going in position, I think, on those places too. So
I would like to listen to Ben Shapiro, but I like to listen to things, my podcasts and everything, at 1.5 speed.
he's already 1.5.
And when you turn him on, it's just like
This is too fast.
it's too monotonous.
It's too fast.
But Knowles is pretty good. I like Knowles and
Yeah.
Michael Knowles. And,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. I like the Daily Wire as well.
Yeah.
And this news consumption for me became, I think, more important with the whole COVID thing. Coming here to this church as a pastor and then just seeing something's up.
Yeah.
And what I want to know is what was objectively true. And for me, every morning I come and I do a news grab. What's going on? And personally, what I'm looking for, what are things that are affecting the church?
Yeah.
Like what's really going on with our freedom to our own faith and worship and all of that. What do I need to be informed about? How is that ultimately going to affect our worship and gathering together as a Christian community? And I don't want to go off of. I don't want to be left in the dark because I'm following some contrived narrative.
Yeah.
I want to know what's really going on, and I don't want to be the sky is falling.
Yeah.
Little chicken or Chicken Little.
We're probably going to do podcasts on moderation later, but I think moderation comes up here too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that you have to take in your news, it's like, it should be like how you check email or how you relate to your phone. There should be times once a day or maybe twice a day or whenever you do it, but you're not just continually checking, scrolling, or sitting in front of a TV all evening, just getting angry. And I think that's we've seen a lot of that in the 24-hour news cycle. Is just
constant press of
yeah.
I tell you, I do think there's some areas in the news cycle, especially around foreign policy, that I think are really, really hard to build sort of an ethos around what you trust. Like, I think the Ukraine-Russian war conflict, that's one that, like, from the get-go, I haven't trusted any of the news on.
Right.
Because Russia's highly incented to lie a lot. Al Jazeera reports on Russia for some reason all the time, and they're lying all the time. And then you got the Ukrainians who are definitely lying all the time because they have political interest in getting sympathy internationally.
Oh, and by the way, they've been known as the most corrupt nation for decades.
Very, very long time, right? There's reasons why they're not in NATO. I mean, like, I'm not sympathetic to the fact that there's a war over there, but at the other hand, like, the news around it has been, I suspect, highly corrupt the entire time.
Right.
So what do? You pray for them, but you really don't know what's going on.
Right.
And you really can't.
Right.
I don't know.
And I don't know how accurate it is, but this is coming back to Twitter. But I remember, like, somebody who I think is reputable on Twitter who, like, has been covering it and was like, day 1, here's what happened.
Yeah.
Day 2, here's what happened. And then day 300, here's what happened. And they've continued to do that every day, and it's like no spin, it's like just this is the latest update on the war, and I've kind of been following that all the way, and it's like, I mean, that is what is that's what's hard about today's news, right? It takes so much work to find that person. They're needles and haystacks. You got to find them, and then to see if they really prove themselves.
Yeah.
And then, but it's because it's ever changing. I just feel like that's what's hard. It just takes so much more work.
Yeah.
I don't feel like there's anywhere that's just like, oh, it's ready made. Here you go.
Yeah. So I would say for any guy that doesn't have the time to do it, I think you need to find a guy that does do it. Get some highlights, because I don't think you can just get cursory highlights and trust it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Unless you've got that trusted news source.
Yeah.
And I definitely think seasonally, you pay attention seasonally too.
Yeah.
Like some seasons you're just like, this is important, I need to think about this strategically for whatever reason. And then sometimes you have like a newborn baby and you're like, basically I'm gonna die if I don't, and I gotta feed this baby first and then pass out. What's going on in the news?
Don't care.
Doesn't matter. Is it on my door? No. Then I don't need to worry about it, right? It's a mix seasonally. But awareness is important all the time, to an extent, right?
Yeah.
So the moral of the story is read the news, not too much, be discerning, find places you trust.
Yeah.
Whew. That's a laundry list.
It's a laundry list.
That's a lot of stuff if you haven't done it yet.
Good luck.
But that's the effort it takes these days to be properly informed.
I trust my wife, and she trusts Ben. So we're going to be there for a bit. We'll see how that goes. That's our path right now.
Yeah.
Well, if the wife is happy,
Yeah.
how can you not be happy?
Yeah.
All right, that's all, folks. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll talk soon.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Play the Man podcast. Stay sturdy, friends.